Hey, it's Anthony with Land Title. I can bring your Greater Metro Denver update for the month. Let's look back at September and kind of dial in what really happened. Now, I think there's a few overlying trends here. Number one, much higher inventory than this time last year, but how did we get there and what's happening is really a lot of the story. So we'll take that up next. First thing we want to look at too is really how under contracts and solds have really started to creep up just a little bit. So buyer behavior is definitely better than it was this time last year. But because of that extra inventory, even with that added buyer behavior, we've seen some price compression in the marketplace where average sales is down by 0.6%. That active units of inventory up 10% really leads us to this, right? It's definitely happening in different areas. Places like the city of Broomfield, Jefferson County, Adams County are really leading that extra inventory on the market. But if you remember right, this time last year, they were actually slightly less than most marketplaces. So here's what we're really looking at. We're looking at a fact that most markets peak in about September for active units on the marketplace, right? People kind of take their time. Sellers control more of the market behavior. Well, all of a sudden, we had this huge surplus of inventory in the springtime. It really led, April, May, June, we just had these huge peaks in inventory we weren't used to. And sellers were getting frustrated. And as sellers got frustrated and pulled stuff off the marketplace early, we had a peak of our inventory in June this year. And when this happened, it really was sort of a shock to the system. And sellers decided, I don't necessarily know if I like the price I'm going to get for my house, or I'm not really willing to be patient and wait long enough or do the extra work required. So a lot of that stuff came off the market. And it does appear that it's not getting relisted immediately. That doesn't necessarily mean it won't get listed early next year or maybe just try again later. But for now, either people are sitting put or they've rented properties out. And it has created a really unique environment this year. Now, if we look at new listing activity, so this is sellers bringing homes to market, you can see it is way out of whack this year compared to what it normally is. Think of 2023 as kind of that bedrock year, right? It couldn't really get much lower than that. Then all of a sudden we get excited sellers in the spring in 24, but everything else stayed kind of the same. This year, we've seen so many listings come in the spring that it kind of trickled off later in the year because people looked at it and go, oh boy, they're not getting sold, too much inventory on the market. Maybe we need to do something different. And then of course, if you compare it to the pandemic years, new listings are at nowhere near those levels. So sellers are still hesitant to bring it to market because they may not like the price, but at the same time, people are getting a little bit more likely to sell than they were before. Now, what does this really mean? It means that, as it takes time to sell, detached single family homes are acting very different than attached, right? In a transitioning market, these take place pretty frequently where detached is a little bit more stable. We only have about 3 months of inventory, even though that number feels very large. Most of the marketplaces outside of like in Elbert County at 4 months of inventory are right around that 3 months mark, which means that, if no more homes come on the market, it takes 3 months to sell everything. So that's a good sign for detached. It's still very stable. If you look at the attached market, though, this market is just brutal, right? I mean, there's just too many homes on the marketplace. There's not enough buyers out there looking at homes. And it almost seems like the worse the inventory situation gets, the more buyers run away. So we're sitting around 5 months of inventory. City of Denver is sitting at 6 months of inventory. It's rough. This is a tough market. It's a very difficult place to be as a seller. Now, as a buyer, it might present a lot of opportunities, but there's still a lot of hurdles. So a lot of people haven't been participating. If you look at it by how fast this is selling, the difference is very large now between detached and attached. The detached market, really look at Denver at 45 days, very similar to that average of 49 days. Some of those places like Adams County or Elbert County might be up in the upper 50s, but it's not terrible. We're talking, 1.5, 2 months to really get something under contract. You get over to the attached market, and this is where it gets much more extreme. You got 6 months of inventory in Denver, 68 days on average in MLS, which means some of it is almost indefinitely sitting because it's overpriced. I mean, we're at 35% larger than it was this time last year. Again, it's just a tough market, right? So we very much can point to that in the attached side. But if we look at it combined, there's definitely been a trend, right? Luxury is selling again, and it's selling much faster than before. We've definitely seen some of those prices come down a little bit, and that's helping fuel that fire, right? 2 to 3 million was up 62% year over year. Big numbers for luxury this month. And the 3+ million market was up almost 40%. The issue is the cost of money is being is holding back some of this, right? So there's not a lot of trade ups, that 1 to 2 million mark, where you would normally see people, sell an $800,000 house, buy a $1 million house or $1.2 million house as they needed more space, or whatever happens in their career gets better. You're just not seeing as much of it. So we're still seeing a decrease in that 1 to 2 million range. Now, 6 to 800,000 and 800 to a million, you are seeing a slow saturation and increase in buyer behavior, because buyers eventually are getting frustrated, right? And as they're getting, their financial situations in order, or interest rates are coming down a little bit and prices have kind of settled, it seems like a more attractive time to buy, and they're kind of rolling back into market. So there's really the tale of the three pieces of the market here. Luxury obviously is our shining light right now, which is exciting to see. When we look at month supply of inventory and days on market, it's worth noting that they're very different, detached to attached. But the detached single family home market, if you're under a million, we're talking 3.5 months of inventory, 3 months of inventory, 2.5 months of inventory by the time you hit 500,000. There's not a lot of inventory there, but there's enough inventory there that it could feel stale. It could feel slow, right? Now, on average, most of those are taking about 45 days, 50 days to go under contract. So it is slow and steady, at least, but it's not great. It's definitely more of a balanced feeling market right now than many other times. But once you get up into the luxury price points, over a million, 4 months, over 2 million, 6 months, over 3 million, we're talking 9 months of inventory. There's a lot to choose from, and that's creating that price decreases in the marketplace. But because of that, it really is bringing buyers back, and it's just a lot of cash up in that range. So when you're not quite as resistant to borrowing because the payment would be so high, you really do see a lot more people thinking, Denver Metro is a great place to go park money in uncertain times. And I think that's been really unpackaged here over the last year. The attached market, I think the luxury market is very similar to the detached market in some ways, but the real issue is that it's taking 50-40% longer than it was on the detached market to sell everything else. It's largely just because we have that 4 to 6 months of inventory in there. And that's a really difficult range for a lot of us to be in, because it's tough to coach sellers that they're going to have to be so aggressive on price to bring it down where it can get sold. But also to be patient enough to wait for a buyer to actually come through that's a good match for your condo or your townhouse. So this is a unique situation that we don't experience a ton, but we always experience it towards the latter end of these downward facing markets, right? We experience this really heavily in 08, 09, 2011, where the attached market really struggled. And, you can see here. So let's talk average sales price. The detached market, very seasonal, very cyclical. You can see through the course of history here really how it's reacted. Certain markets have been way up in years past, and here we are trying to catch back up. But it does feel like the market still is appreciating slightly in the detached market. Year over year, we're up 2%. So that's a really good sign. Month over month, we're down a little bit, but you can see that it's slightly seasonal. It could be largely due to with so much inventory in the market, and as people are pulling stuff off, the people that are motivated to sell are really having to make some aggressive decisions on price. So that is going to drag price down a little bit the latter portion of the year. Think, the fourth quarter. But if you look by area, it is very different. Take Broomfield with a grain of salt a little bit, because 13% is a little extreme. Obviously, we had a little bit different composition of sales there, but most of the markets are, 1 to 5-6% up in average sales price for detached single family, outside of Adams County, which has been hit a little bit harder at -4%. Now, the attached market is the total flip side of the coin. Ever since we hit our peak in 22, we really have had this slow erosion in value in this marketplace. You can see it over the course of time. We're down 5% year over year, which probably coupled with 5% the previous year and maybe even 5% in 23, has created this environment where prices went from somewhere near 500,000 almost down to 425. And so we're in this unique position where the attached market has been suffering. This happens quite a bit in these seasonal markets. If you own attached property, it could be just hang out and weather the storm. But I also think there could be a lot of people in this marketplace that are listing, that are maybe investors or they own stuff outright, that are ready to just do something else with their capital. So there's a very unique environment here. definitely HOAs, insurance, taxes, all the things that are really compounding the affordability crisis here. This is the part of the market that's being hit the most by affordability. And usually this is a great product for our first time home buyers, and they are just not participating, which has created the environment we're in. Let's talk about sold units. If we look at it from, the total sold units for the detached market, year to date, we're up 4%. That's a pretty positive number in a market that has been seemingly very challenging. Year over year, the number looked really great in September. Interest rates have come down a little bit right now. That's going to continue to fuel some of what's happening. So that's a good sign. October seems to be looking up as well. So these are all great news for the detached market. The attached market, like I said, it's much more challenging. We really have not hit any of the numbers we hit a year ago, and that just continues to compound that sales price drop. So here we are down about 9% for the year. This coupled with basically what's coming down the pike, assume we're down 7-8%. This is just a challenging market. So we have a lot of that happening. Some of these markets are much worse. Broomfield's down 20%. City of Denver just seems to be getting hit harder than everybody else, 15% reduction in sales. Now, the last slide I have for you is the percentage listed sale price. This is a little misleading right now because it shows some seasonality to it, but really we're not talking about concessions and we're not talking about price drops. So when either one of those start to happen, it really compounds this number and makes it so much more extreme, but we don't have a great way to measure that. So just keep in mind, as land title is experiencing 68% of deals having concessions between that 500 and a million range, this doesn't tell the whole story. So maybe this isn't just a great slide to send off to people, but it really can help them understand that sellers are in a much tougher position than they have been in years past. So with that being said, please reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, you need other data or information. Always happy to help. This is Anthony at Land Title. Catch you next time.